What is going on, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to the Tux Care stream. It's been a minute. We've been on the road. We've been having vacations. We're going back on the road this weekend, so it's going to be a little while till we stream again. If you're not following your boy on Twitter, that's me, Chris DeMars, Senior Developer Advocate at Tux Care. Make sure that you give me a follow. Twitter.com/SaltandBurnham. Make sure that you're giving TuxCare a follow too on all the socials, but also twitter.com/TuxCare_. If you don't know what we are about, go to tuxcare.com. We do a bunch of cool different things. We do endless life cycle support for end of life solutions, kernel care, which is a product for live rebootless patching for Linux distributions. We do a bunch of amazing stuff, and we got some sneaky stuff coming out soon. So stay tuned to my socials. Stay tuned to the TuxCare socials, and you'll find out what that sneaky, awesome stuff is. But I can't give you too much right now. So keep it on the DL. I want to bring up a guest today that I've met through the Virtual Coffee Slack. Shout out to Virtual Coffee. I am an old school OG VC member. Shout out to Becca. Shout out to Nick. Shout out to everybody in that community. And I want to bring up my guest, Frank Taylor. What's going on, Frank?
Howdy, Chris. How's it going?
Let's go, man. I appreciate you taking the time and then last minute to come up on the stream, which is great though, because that's what community is all about. And VC is a great community. I know I'm not super active in there all the time, but like I said, I've been an OG member, since Becca started that. Becca and I go way back, so I appreciate you taking the time. So, give us a little intro about who you are, what you do, what you're all about.
Yeah. So, hi, my name is Frank. I go by Frank M. Taylor online because there's like a million people named Frank Taylor, so the M makes me more Googleable. My handle for the internet is Paco. Paceaux, and I get it. That's not how you're supposed to spell Paco. Origin story for that is that my name is Frank. I went to school to be a translator, and I got degrees in French and Spanish, and I wasn't that good of a translator, but moved to Texas, and I had a job working in a call center, taking French and Spanish calls all day, and I had a friend from Louisiana, state right next door, and his name was Chico, and it was spelled Chiceaux. And Chico and I were just playing Halo one day, and he's like, yeah, you need the Cajun spelling of Paco, because Paco was a nickname that I had forever. So if you want to find me in any of the socials, it's Paco. What am I doing here? Well, I started life trying to be a translator, and I accidentally ended up in web development focused in content management. I've worked as a front-end engineer and worked in the scope of content management going on, gosh, what is it, 2026 now? So like 16, 17 years, I've done front end specifically in the scope of content management. And if folks aren't sure what that means, well, that content management systems are the software that manage major websites, even small ones. So I have worked mostly actually in closed source content management systems. And then in the last few years, I started working at Red Hat as a Drupal engineer. So I focus on front end and Drupal stuff. And I've consulted for like some really big clients, Fortune 500 clients, like major household names, helping implement content management systems and the front end that goes with it. So that's what I've been doing for most of this time, is building front ends for really big companies that are using like enterprise content management. And okay, well, how did I get from being a guy working in a call center with like to that? It was a slow thing where I was in a call center taking calls in French and Spanish all day, and eventually I ended up working on like a small knowledge base, and I didn't know anything about how to do it, so I did it in Notepad and MS Paint, building out a very tiny internal website that became an 80-page internal website that had all of our knowledge. And eventually marketing found out, and they're like, you should come over here. And first day on the job in the brand new web marketing department was, hey, just so you know, IDEs exist. Why were you doing this in Notepad? And then my second lesson was, also, by the way, CSS, you could have done that the whole time, and you did. And so I started reading books on CSS, and I started managing the content management system, and because they were like, hey, you know a few languages, you need to work with all the international offices, coordinate their content, get it into the system. And fast forward to today, I've been a principal architect, principal consultant, whatever, but I do front end plus internationalization plus content management stuff, and I get really loud and opinionated when talking about that stuff. Not all of my opinions are good. At least half of them aren't, but they're mine, and they're based on what I've done for many years in front end and content management.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Also, too, I want to plug this. If anybody wants to check out Frank's blog.frankmtaylor.com. Check that out. Great blog posts on there. And I also have to give a shout out to Mr. Lee Brandt. Glad you're joining, Lee. Lee and I go way back too. Lee's an amazing guy. So yeah, check out Frank's blog.frankmtaylor.com. So Frank, by the title, which you came up with a great title, I love it. You and I chatted a lot last night. We are old school web heads. I'm a little more old school than you, but we both started in old school stuff when it comes to languages and software and all that stuff. And you are opinionated on these things. I'm also very opinionated when it comes to OG HTML, CSS, semantics, accessibility. I built a career around web accessibility. I traveled around the world and did that. So I'm extremely opinionated on how stuff like that works in front-end architectures. So this is a great topic. So you don't know HTML. What don't I know about HTML? What does the community not know about HTML? What does our audience not know? Run us through all this. Run us through what you're going to talk about. If you have some demos, that's great.
Yeah.
And we'll just vibe on it.
Yeah. So yes, I've got stuff that we'll show, but here's the thesis. You don't know HTML. And cool, that's fine. I get it. You've written it. I get that you probably have an audience that are like, what the hell? I write HTML every day. I'm sure you do. Did you know that there's an HTML element for displaying a variable? Did you know that there's an HTML element for displaying data? Did you know that there's an HTML element for displaying the output of a form? Did you know that there's an HTML element for displaying a keyboard button or a button that you have to push? Did you know that there's an HTML element specifically for showing multi-language text, for showing one language on top and another language on bottom? Did you know that there are multiple ways that you can build HTML tables? Do you know all of the elements that you don't need to put in an HTML table? Did you know that there are 5 different ways to make a list in HTML? So let's start. Did you know that there are semantically correct ways to show variables? Anyone?
Mm-mm.
All right, cool. Is there a way that we can get a screen share going? Can I click a?
Yeah, if you go down to the bottom and of your stream, you should be able to share screen, and then you can choose what you want to share, and then once you get it up, I can put it up on the stage.
Cool. So we should now see some CodePen. All right.
There you go.
Right on. So we're going to talk first through a bunch of the did you knows. Now, because I'm old school, I like not having to work with a bunch of CSS frameworks if I don't have to. I like to go bare metal. About 10 years ago, I was working with a major company, a multi-million-dollar company. We had this little problem where it worked fine, but then they wanted a Japanese font, and I got brought into the project around the time they're like, Frank, just add a Japanese font. That should be fine. Come to find out, none of the guys on that team had thought to ever put any styles on any elements at all. They had been styling on classes. So I had to go through a massive code base and actually lift up the foundation, put styles on elements, and then set it back down, consolidate a whole bunch of stuff so that eventually I could get to the point where I could add a few lines of CSS that added a Japanese font. Result of that was that I had to find out what HTML elements needed to look like. And that meant reading the entire specification and then putting together like a style sheet of what I thought everything that ever needed to text needed to look like. So I created this thing called the typography baseline. It's on GitHub if you want to see it here. But this is a demo of every HTML element that wraps text directly. And I put styles on it. So we're not going to talk about the style stuff. We're going to talk about the HTML semantics that I bet you didn't know. But don't worry, like that's why we're here. We're here to learn what you don't know. And that's always going to be the first thing. So look, everyone is familiar with the headings. Everyone's familiar with the paragraph stuff. You might not be familiar with the fact that I has made a comeback and that the HTML element I has its own semantics. And quite specifically, you're supposed to use it for the name of boats. I bet, but I mean, you knew that because you're OG. So you know that the I element was here. And now you're supposed to use it, one, for names of boats, or if you wanted to put something in an alternate voice. Those are the two purposes of the I element, not for icons. If you see someone using the HTML element I for icons, it's not what it's for. And I know that we know about like the strike through element to show that something's been stricken through. I know that we know about the delete element. So if you're making like an editing interface and you want to show, oh, this has been removed. Yes, there's the DEL element that you're supposed to be using. So yeah, we know about that. And that's okay. And by the way, the U element, totally cool, right? Because the U element is what you use to show that something has been misspelled. So, right, we knew that. I wasn't talking about that stuff. I was talking about, the variable element, the var element. So we're going to jump down to code semantics. And by the way, there it is right there.
Wow.
The var element is what you use in HTML to say this is a variable. That is super handy. And by the way, if you need to talk about a button that someone needs to press on a keyboard, or it could be a mouse button, that's permissible. That's the KBD element. So if we're trying to talk about specifically the code that we want to write or how we want someone to interact with an application, we should be using the var element and the KBD element, but we shouldn't forget either the SAMP element. Check this out. If you needed to show the result of a computation, then, and by the way, this would be the result of a computation where it's not a dynamic computation. That's a different element. We're talking about if you were showing a formula, you would show the formula with code or pre, and then the result of your formula is what you would put in SAMP. And of course, we've still got our data element. And that data element is supposed to be how we get to mark up that I've got information. One part of this information is for the humans, and the other part of the information is for the computer. This would be really handy for your e-commerce applications if you've got to show price. If you need a machine version of price and a non-machine version of price, data element is your friend. So I'm going to pause here a little bit for dramatic effect and just let's let this settle in. There's HTML elements for variables, for keyboard buttons, for output and data. Did we know that?
Like, so it's awesome that you bring this up, because like when you and I were talking, the original HTML book, well, I learned HTML around the same time I was learning QBasic. I learned HTML before I had an HTML book. I learned HTML in school.
Mm-hmm.
And even like the first HTML book I got was like HTML 4.0.1 for dummies. But I don't remember there ever being a var element in there. At the time, U was used for underline, I was used for italics, and there wasn't like a spec around that. I don't
Right.
remember there being a keyboard, a code, what is it, a SAMP. So like that is like this is all really really cool, and I'm sure I could pretty much just bet on a lot of developers, especially new school cats, maybe even a lot of the old school cats like myself, don't know about these elements. So this is extremely knowledgeable. This is like really really good stuff.
Right. So this is just like this is why. And by the way, I'm writing a whole series of articles on my blog that are it's a you don't know HTML series. The first article in that was tables. And the second one, which is going to be coming out in the next few weeks, is lists. Because turns out there's a lot about lists that we maybe don't know. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit next. But I mentioned, by the way, that there's semantics for even if you needed to display multiple languages together. This is like, I think, one of the most underappreciated elements. And we're going to jump down. There's language semantics. So check it
Oh,
out.
wow.
You see how I've got some Korean right over my own name?
Yeah.
Okay. How like that's not CSS doing that. Okay. That I gotta make that clear. That's not CSS that made that possible. That is courtesy of this lovely little Ruby element. The Ruby element is specifically for, oh, I've got to show two different languages, one on top of the other. You start with your Ruby element. You're going to have to declare the language. And then you're going to start with your Ruby tag element after that. So again, you don't know HTML. Did you know that there's a way to present two languages right up on top of each other?
That's new to me. I've never heard that. This is literally the first time in my 40 years of life and 30 plus years of building on the front end that I've heard of this.
But wait, it gets better. Did you also know about the BDI and BDO elements for
No.
language? Okay.
This is all brand new, dude.
Perfect. So let's say that you're a speaker of a right to left language. Not all languages read left to right. Some go right to left. Two of those in particular would be Hebrew and Arabic. So if you want to interject languages that go in different directions, the polite thing to do for screen readers and for the browser is to use a BDO or BDI element. The BDI element means that you're going in an isolated direction. You're telling the browser any of this text, however it's flowing, isolated. Don't treat other text like it needs to be going in that direction. This is to help screen readers understand what direction they need to be going in.
Wow.
Because screen readers can get very confused, especially when you intermix these languages. And this is actually something that happens somewhat common, especially in Hebrew language websites and Arabic language websites, because sometimes they're going to show an English term or an English chunk of whatever. And it's really important to know, hey, we got to trigger flip of language. And you'll see that when I have this right here, and I want to say like shalom in the home, shalom babayit is how I would say that in Hebrew. And what do I need to do? I need to indicate change of direction with that BDI element. Wow. Again, that's your isolation. I think it's binary directional isolation, or bidirectional isolation, I think is what BDI is for. But it's meant to indicate text here, don't treat the other text like it flows in this direction. So, okay, cool. Now we've learned. So we started with, there's semantics for just computery stuff. There's HTML semantics for variables, for data, for computations, for keyboard buttons. Now there's language semantics There's semantics for showing two languages stacked on top of each other. There's also an element specifically for telling the browser and any screen readers text needs to go in another direction. Could there be other HTML semantics that we don't know?
I'm sure.
All right. So let's and we'll dabble, and I'm gonna drop it here, and we're gonna circle back to it. There's lists, okay? There's 4 lists that are directly responsible for wrapping content type text: ordered list, unordered list, menu, and definition list. We're gonna come back to that. Let's remember, of course, the ways that we can quote. That number one, and I'm going to scroll up here in our code a little bit, that we've got our Q element. That is for inline quotes. Fun fact, if you want to have special quotes for wrapping quotes in text, you can totally do that. You would use the Q element and then just put a little CSS for your fancy inline quotes. And then you can, this is where I'll show the CSS, that you can then decide if you're going to share, have your Q element have the same quotes as block quote, because these are the only 2 elements that are really cool with having a quotes property. So keep that in mind. If you've got custom quotes, the very cool thing to do would be to use a Q element for inline quotes, and your block quote is your block level quote. But let's not forget that while I've got my Q element for inline quotes, and you'll notice here from looking in the text, there's no quotes now. This kind of helps us solve the problem of, the quotes being totally messed up, going from language to language or going from site to site. Like, are they going to be straight down? Are they going to be curly? What's going to happen? Q element is going to help us with that, because we're letting it be responsible for providing the quotes. So we're no longer making that like a text thing. We're making that a visual thing. We shouldn't forget the small element. All right, the semantics for small, like we should be using small. Everyone should be using small, because every footer has legalese. And the specs tell us that the small element is what you're supposed to use for any legalese. Anything that's supposed to be like copyright, all rights reserved, trademarked, can't use until after 10 p.m. Don't water after midnight or else it becomes a gremlin. All of that should be in the small element. We have our sub and our soup that we can be using for like raising stuff up or down. And that's, again, semantic. That has meaning that's supposed to be like, you go to it later or check it out after the fact. So we want to remember, when we're quoting, use the Q element for inline elements. You get style points for it. Like, designers will love you because now you can do your fun extra quotes. Is it a French site? Did you know that French have different double quotes than English?
Mm-mm.
They do. And you can now handle all of that through CSS if you use the Q element and CSS. Now you can handle how every language quotes text differently. Super handy. You've got small for your legalese, and you've got sub and soup. So, and oh, by the way, let's not forget cite, that you're definitely encouraged, if you're going to use a block quote, to use the cite element, because that helps from a semantic perspective create an association between person who said it and the saying. So try to always use block quote and cite. All right. So are we learning some stuff about quoting now? Have we learned a little bit more about how to quote in HTML?
Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
All right. So this is where, okay, what's some other stuff? There's definition stuff, y'all. Like, if you needed to put a definition, who hasn't made a glossary? Who hasn't had to build out a glossary? We should be using the definition element. And oh, by the way, if it's a definition that involves an acronym or an initialism. Those are different. Doesn't matter. If you wanted to point out like, oh, laser, the way that Dr. Evil would have said it, if you're talking about a laser, that's technically an initialism because you can pronounce the first part of each letter. It stands for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. If you wanted people to know that incredibly fun and niche fact, it goes in a definition element that goes in an ABBR element, an abbreviation element. And you're supposed to give it a title where you get to explain the whole thing. So if you're trying to drop your fun fact about laser, radar, or scuba, this is how you're going to do that. You're going to put it in a definition element. You're going to put an abbreviation element. You're going to say the whole thing out. And by the way, when you use a definition element in line, it should be within a paragraph, because the way that the specification reads is that the remainder of the block that it's contained in is supposed to be the definition. The definition is meant to be, well, this is the term that is being defined. So wow. Cool. We've got definition semantics. So we've got code semantics, variable. We've got data. We've got outputs from some sort of formula. We've got language semantics for, oh, these two languages need to go together and get stacked on top. We've got directional semantics to say this text needs to go in this direction. We've got inline quoting semantics to say, oh, this is just an inline quote, or this is a block quote, which is neat to know. Block quote always had a partner. It had the inline quote alternative. We've got definition semantics, abbreviation semantics. And then of course, we've got our editing semantics. We've got mark, strike, insert, and delete. We have all of these ways. Like when you're writing a Google Doc, like editing it or highlighting it, think about what's happening when you're deleting stuff, when you're inserting stuff. If someone has commented and inserted something into your document, think about what those semantics would need to be if someone has added and contributed to your document. That's the kind of stuff that these editing semantics are for. It's for indicating, oh, highlight this part. This part isn't relevant. This part is being deleted. Like we have semantics to indicate all of that. And it's in my typography baseline, I put styles that are very similar. So like I have my strike through looking similar, but not exactly the same as my delete style. But doesn't matter. Like it's up to you to decide how similar or dissimilar you want them to be. One thing I will say though, mark, that is supposed to be your highlighted text if you wanted to highlight it. But what happens when you do this? What happens when you just click and drag on a bit of text? Isn't that also marking and highlighting? This is where, okay, I get it. Like we're talking about, you don't know HTML, but I do want to call out, like if you're going to go through the work of like figuring out mark, you have this selection pseudo class, and you might need to deal with what's going to happen if someone tries to highlight the already highlighted text. So just be aware that if you're going to start writing styles and you're going to be writing styles for mark, well, by default, you could use the same styles you're using for selection. Just, you know, then you've got to account for you've selected your mark. Sure. So, oh, and by the way, quick shout out for time, because, you know, we have an element for indicating what time it is. And there are attributes that we can put on there if we want to put a machine readable version of that time. So every time we're dealing with time, use the time element. Okay. Semantics, language semantics, definition semantics, editing semantics. This is where I'm going to pause and say, have we learned anything about HTML?
I've learned a lot, a lot of stuff that I didn't know.
All right. So I guess I'll leave it up to where we go from here. Do we want to talk about lists or do we want to talk about tables?
Let's talk about both because now I'm extremely intrigued.
Okay. So this is where I'm going to do a plug for my article. It's in, I don't know why it says 2 minutes. It's not 2. It's like 20 some odd. Don't worry about that. This is an article called "You Don't Know HTML Tables," and I'm not going to read to y'all the article because no one's here for that. What I want to do though is talk through some of the stuff that you may not know. Now, what I'm going to highlight in the article is that there's a bunch of vocabulary stuff. And if you want to have a truly in-depth understanding of tables, it's going to have to start with understanding of vocabulary. And that's relevant to just how everything else in tables work. And within that, here are the quick highlights. There is a table object model, a TOM, I like to call it. No one is calling it a TOM. It should be called a TOM. There's a table object model. There's a JavaScript API that is attached to every table. That's just cool in itself. I'm not going to discuss, like right now in a live stream, all of that stuff, but my article goes into the cool parts of the TOM and the problematic parts of the TOM, the table object model. What I want folks to focus on, like for the purposes of a live stream, is like, okay, there's a bunch of different parts. There's a caption, a T head, a T foot, a T body, call group, call, row, and cell, and header. Cool. That's where we're at. I bet people kind of know that. What I'm going to do is jump over to one of my other baselines, because my baseline started with, I'm going to go through the specs, read the spec for every HTML element, make sure that there's a style. That way I'll never, ever again have to think about what the heck a marked element needs to look like. But then I thought, what about tables? How can I make sure that I also will never have a problem again with tables? So I created a table baseline, and I went through the specs again, the table specs, and I went through and tried to figure out what are all of the different ways that I can make an HTML table. And this is where we're going to talk about, all right, tables. So I want people to know there's a table object model. Cool. Know that, read the article. Don't read my article, like if you don't want to, like look it up. It's fine. But know that if you are writing JavaScript for tables without using the table object model, you're missing out. You're missing out on built-in browser functionality. Okay. All of that said, let's start with the basics of how you can make a table. Starts with the table element. Tables like to have captions. You should use the caption element. Someone has asked before, wait, there's a caption element for tables, but then why is there a fig caption element for the figure element? Why couldn't they both use caption? Answer is probably because the caption element has stuck around tables and been in tables for so long. There's specific presentational considerations that the browser makes for the caption. Like the browser by default wants to put the caption element at the top, really small, in italicized text. So it was easier when they were implementing figure and fig caption to just not make those assumptions. But let's start with that understanding. Tables can and should, for good accessibility purposes, they should have a caption. That is polite. It's the warm, neighborly thing to do. Caption your tables. All right. That'll announce to a user, oh, this is what this table is about. So the next thing, You don't need to use a T head or a T body, but it's, once again, the warm, neighborly, and polite thing to do. The T head, its purpose is going to be to introduce information about the columns or the table. So your T head, yep, you can put one table row. You would usually, but not always, but usually put in a bunch of TH elements. Then you got your table body. And then, your table body has your rows. We're going to talk about these attributes in just a moment. But then sometimes, oh, look at that. What's this down here? This looks like it was some sort of spreadsheet kind of thing. What if we wanted to make a table that was more spreadsheet looking, and we wanted to have like the results of a bunch of stuff at the bottom? That's what your T-foot is for. And this is an important semantic difference. The table head is to introduce your columns. It's to just tell you stuff about the columns. That's it. Your table foot is to be the summary of the data that has been presented to the user. I want to dial in on how that's an important distinction. If you showed people a bunch of numbers, okay, well, you want to introduce the column, cool. That's where you should put that 2008. But now you've added all the stuff up. That doesn't belong in your table body. That belongs in your table foot. All of the conclusions that you would make about the table body, those belong in the table foot. So big distinction. And you'll notice, like in the HTML here, that my table foot comes after the table body. Now, in the HTML4 specifications, you were supposed to write your HTML as open up with your table, and then you do your caption, and then you do your T head, and then you do your T foot, and then you do your T body. So if you've been around HTML for a hot minute, like we have, that's how we used to be doing our tables. HTML5 was like, that's kind of ridiculous, and this is really hard. Can we please not make this so hard for our browser implementers? So they changed it in HTML5 and said, no, let's put the foot where the feet would naturally go on the body, which, if you think about it, makes so much more sense. It's actually weird that they ever let you put T head and T foot first. It's weird to think that's what they were initially okay with. So T head introduces your table. T body, that's the meat. That's all your toppings. And then your T foot, well, that might be the other piece of bread. You're making a sandwich. You're making a nice little data sandwich where, your T head, T body, T foot. But something else to keep in mind is that, okay, this is a weird looking table. All right. And by the way, this is taken straight from the specifications. That's why it looks weird. So don't beef with me about why we've got a table about cats and English speakers. This is a layout borrowed directly from the table specifications. But here's the point that I want to call out. It's multiple T bodies, because you can put more than one table body in a table. And if you didn't know that, awesome. That's why we're here. There might be, and there probably are, really good reasons why you should be putting more than one table body in a table. It could just be, I just want to compare these two pieces of data that are maybe kind of sort of similar. That's enough for you to have multiple table bodies. You are not allowed to have multiple T heads or multiple T foots. You only get multiple T bodies. But keep in mind, that is always an option on the table. How you choose to style that is going to be up to you. But okay, so how complex can your tables get? And going back, by the way, to something earlier, that I kind of have a thing for languages. That's why we've got a bunch of tables about words in different languages. That's just the thing that I like to do. And now all of y'all get to suffer with me. All right. So let's say we had a table about different language groups and language families. Well, how would we do that? How would we mark that up? Oh, by the way, look at this. There's a call group and a call element. What's the point of this? This is really hard to understand. Why we have a call group. And by the way, why isn't there a row group? And wait, no, there is a table row, but there isn't a row group. Fun fact, the T head, the T body, and the T foot are all considered row groups according to the specifications because tables are row oriented. So that's why there's a call group, but not a row group, because you've got your 3 row group elements. So what's the point of the call group? Well, what if you just needed to semantically indicate these columns belong together? Why would you do that? Mostly for style purposes. Mostly if you needed some sort of hook and you didn't want to put it on the individual TD or TH elements, that's your call, and that's your call group. That it's mostly the purpose. The way the specifications read is that even if you don't write a call group and a call, every table starts off with one. It's just implicit. They assume that there's one call group for the table, and if you don't write it out, that's fine. You don't write it out. And every TD/TH, there's an implicit call that goes with it. This is just a way to be explicit, to explain how maybe you want columns to be grouped together. So keep that in mind, that you don't always, chances are you don't need a call and call group unless you do. And you'll know when you do, because you'll have a weird use case where you're going to have like, the business coming at you with like, 11th hour. Oh, we need to change the way the table looks, and we need this side to be fuchsia. Okay, it's time for call and call group. Most of the time, though, you get to ignore it. And again, this is an example where you can group your calls and call groups together. And you'll notice something, by the way, in this T head, because you see how there's this gap right here? What are you supposed to do with tables when you just don't have anything there in that part of the head? That should not be a TH. That should be a TD, and it should be empty. That's what the specifications tell you to do. They say, if you're making a T head and you've got your headers, fine, but the one the header that doesn't have anything, that's not a header. It's a table cell. This, by the way, is a confusing component because when you start learning about the TOM, the table object model that lives with every table, something that it's sorely missing is for the ability through the JavaScript to create or manage table headers and table cells. That's annoying. And that is because they mostly in the TOM merge the concepts, except when it comes to semantics, and now you got to care about the semantics. So everything is a cell by default, unless you decide it needs to be a nut cell, and that needs to be a header. But just know, if it's blank, it should always be a TD. It shouldn't be anything else. And the last thing that I'm going to kind of mention in terms of table semantics is that hopefully folks have noticed that a lot of these tables have an ID and they've got this headers attribute. This is my favorite feature of tables that I think we should be using more. We should be doing this by default when we're making tables. Turns out there are 2 ways to associate. And by the way, when we're talking about table headers, pretend that's not a TH, pretend that's a label, because that's what that is. That's a label for a table cell. You've got 2 ways to tell the browser and therefore the end user, how that label relates to that cell. One is implicit. That just means you put it there, and then you're going to hope for the best and hope the screen reader doesn't mess it up, and you will do fine most of the time, okay? Just to be clear, that's not a wrong way to approach it by just letting, a bare naked TH hang out there. That's not going to offend anyone. But what if it actually kind of mattered when someone is using a screen reader, which label they heard first? That is where headers comes in really handy. Because if you look here, you'll see I've got headers, North Germanic, and then Germanic. Well, look, I've got this ID. The values that go in headers, which by the way need to be space separated, they should match the ID of a header somewhere. And if you put them in the headers attribute, the order in which they appear in that headers attribute is the order in which those labels will be read to someone using an assistive device. So this is another warm, neighborly, gentle, and polite way to put our tables together. Like if you're gonna use a table header and you're gonna use a T-foot, y'all, let's just go the extra mile and let's make sure that we're even being considerate of how we want this to get read to somebody, which order the labels get read to. So and you'll notice too that table headers can also have headers. All right. You're not limited to a table cell for having a label. Like your labels can have labels. You can have labels upon labels upon labels. And here's the other cool thing. If you're going to use the headers and the ID approach for associating labels to labels and labels to cells, if you are working with complex JSON, this just so happens to be a very convenient way to keep a record of how your data is mapping to the visual presentation. Just super nice. All right. So what have we gotten out of this so far? There's a table head. There's a table foot. They make a sandwich of your table body. You can have multiple table bodies. If you want to associate labels with cells, use the headers attribute. That's polite. And it's just polite. You don't have to do it, but it's a polite thing to do. I'm going to pause and invite some questions. Do people have questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? Is this new information for anybody about tables?
It's definitely new for me. I know there's a few people in the chat. Let's see, we got people all over the chat from different places. So if anybody does have any questions, though, they can definitely reach out. I don't see anything coming through at the moment, but this is all mind blowing. Like none of this was taught. I don't think any of this. Well, I mean, it was a super old book, but I don't know if any of this was taught in HTML4 for dummies back in the day.
Nope. Right. And here's the thing. How do you find this stuff out? I mean, read the specs like a bunch. And not everyone has that patience and that willingness to do that. So that's what I do. And by the way, like, that's why I write about it on my blog, so that you don't have to, and so that I can give you the highlights. So yeah, like, and this isn't it, by the way. Let me jump back here really quick, because, okay, these are the baselines. We're not even going to talk about forms. That's its whole other thing. But let me jump back to some of the other examples of stuff that we can do in tables, okay? So these are all of like accessibility tests, because, by the way, I talked about headers and ID. There's also scope. That's an attribute you can use. If you didn't want to use headers and ID, what does that look like? Let me show you. So, and by the way, take note, we like using the language attribute when something's in a different language, because if they're getting it read to them, it should be read in the appropriate language. So use the language attribute, people. It's the warm, neighborly, and polite thing to do. So, okay, we can have tables again without any kind of like intentional labeling, but we can also do stuff with scope. You can have 4 scopes on a label. It could be call, row, call group, or row group. By default, actually, I can't say default. There's no defaults according to the table specification for which one it is. It will do its level best, though, to figure out whether it should be call or row first. And the algorithm for it is basically, if there's no other cells above it, then it's going to assume it's call. And if it's the first one in the far left side of the cell, and this is important, I'm saying far left side, then it will assume the scope is row. And the reason I'm telling you it's far left side is because there are languages where they read right to left. And that means that there is no way to account for that in the table API in the scope. There's no way to build out a table that will be left to right in terms of accessibility. That is why you should use the headers and ID if you're making a table that needs to have labels read in a specific order. But you get scope where you can set it to row, you can set your scope to call, and then of course you get row group and call group. And I can tell you from testing this with screen readers don't seem to care too much about a scope equals row group or call group. But I want y'all to know that it exists so that you can use it. Okay.
That's awesome.
So yeah, this is just the table stuff. And this is like, I haven't even gone into like, again, I want you to know there's a table API. I'm not going to talk about it. What about lists? Are we ready for lists? Do we think that
I think what we should do, we should table the lists and the forms, and I think we need to have a couple more streams for the future.
Perfect.
I think that'd be really cool.
Cool. So then we'll leave it here. One, there's a whole bunch of HTML semantics that y'all need to know. It's super cool, and we should be using it. Number one. Number two, there's a bunch of stuff just in the way that tables work that we should probably be taking advantage of, and it would make life so much easier for those who are blind or visually impaired.
Love it. Love it. You're blowing my mind with all this, and I'm sure you're going to blow my mind when we do lists. We'll do like 2 or 3 more. Who cares? Like we'll do lists, we'll do forms, we'll get something on the schedule for the next couple months, and we'll just have like a little running series on this.
Yeah.
If you're cool with that, I'm cool with that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool.
I'm great with that.
Also, you should do a conference talk on this because I think people would really enjoy it.
Well, find me a conference where I can talk about it, and I will happily do it. I haven't spoken at a tech conference in like 4 years, 5 years.
Oh, really?
So
Yeah.
it's been a minute.
No, I will. That's part of my job is traveling, right? So like I got to go to an event this weekend. Then I come back home and I'm going to go to Germany. Then I got to go to Belgium, then California, then Atlanta. So I'm always on the road. I know conferences. I know organizers. I will reach out and see what I can find for you.
Yeah. My next conference is a linguistics conference that I'll be speaking at in like 3 weeks. So
nice.
Cool. Yep. But yeah, I would love to do a tech conference and tell everyone that they don't know HTML.
Perfect. Love it. Love it. Thank you so much for your time, Frank. I really, really appreciate it. We will get you on. We'll just keep in touch in VC and get you on the next stream. I'm not sure when it's going to be, if anybody's tuned in. So just stay on the Twitters and LinkedIn, whatever the case may be. It'll be posted from either my Twitter account or LinkedIn or the TuxCare account. So with that, we are going to end this stream for the day. Thanks again, Frank, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Take care, y'all.
Later, y'all.